Okay, in this video, we're going to actually set up, in this case, a confidence interval about the difference between two means. So hopefully you watched the first video on testing two proportions where we did all this good stuff. So that way you kind of have Excel down a little bit better, hopefully. I'm hoping, right? All right, so as I mentioned in the first video, you might pause this and just this information here. You don't need this stuff over here. You might go ahead and type all of this information in so that way you can follow me in the video. All right, so hopefully you're back, and again, we're going to set something like this up where I could use it for any confidence interval between two means. So I'm going to work this example here. Okay, it's actually, this information is given in the live session. So if you're wondering where did she get these numbers from, this is from the live session. And I want a 90% confidence interval. So I know my alpha is 1 minus 0.90. So that would be that. The book tells you there's a lot of debate on what you use for the degrees of freedom to find your critical value. The book says pick the sample size minus one of the smaller of the two values. So what I do is I do the formula that's the min. And what this says is give me the minimum, comma, between those two values. Because that way, when I work another problem and I change those numbers, I know my degrees of freedom will be right. So that says, and if I hit enter, you'll see it picked the smaller value. But I need to go back in and I need to add the -1, right? Because the degrees of freedom is your sample size minus 1. All right. So here I'm going to find my critical value, my T critical. I want this to be positive. That's the only reason I'm going to do the 1 minus. You wouldn't have to because, again, it's symmetric, but then you need to make sure you make this a positive value. So I'm going to do 1 minus my T dot INV, my probability, my alpha, comma, my degrees of freedom, and that's my critical value. As I mentioned in the other value, you can decrease the decimal if you don't want to see so many decimal places. All right, so my confidence interval over here, as I can see, is I need my error. So I'm going to find that now because I have my T critical, that's my T alpha over 2. And so I need my entire error, which is going to say take this value, my critical, times the square root of my first sample 1, my first sample standard deviation, and square it, divided by my sample size, plus take my second standard deviation and square it, and divide it by sample size. Now this symbol right here I'm getting by shift 6 for the exponent. All right, so I press enter and that gives me my error. So my confidence interval then, I can just kind of look at this, is equal to my first sample mean minus my second sample mean, and then, minus my error. My other one would be equal to my first sample mean minus my second sample mean plus my error. And if you came to the live chat, you will see that we talked about the results, that if 0 is in this interval, and it is, think from when you go negative to positive, 0's in between there. If 0 is actually in this interval, that's saying basically there's no difference, right? Because it's actually in the interval. But we talk about that more in the live session. This is just how could you set up a spreadsheet to actually test the two means.